Good evening, everybody. It's office hours time again. Thanks for joining me. Very, very special evening tonight. As just to get the housekeeping out of the way, basically jump out on the chat if you can't see me. Jump out on the Q&A, etc. So if you can't chat or you can't hear me, you can't see me, etc., sing out. But other than that, we're going to get straight into it. We've got a special guest tonight. I'm not going to introduce him yet, even though he's jumped ahead and put his webinar camera on and ruined the surprise, destroyed the surprise. I'm just kidding, Martin. We'll get to you in just a second. Let me share my screen and we'll talk about a few little things in terms of what's coming up. And then I'll introduce my guest who's going to have the whole floor tonight to talk about some amazing stuff coming up soon. So let me share my screen. Okay, as always, getting in touch is easy. Notice I've got an updated QR code. That's because our good friend Ludovico inside the database team came up with a mechanism of actually customizing QR codes to put in fact, anyone's image in the middle of it. So I've put my ugly mug in the middle there, but that is a legitimate QR code. It will indeed work. And no doubt you'll see it from various people at Cloud World going forward. As I always say, do not adjust your set. My slide content is normally tucked away down the left such that when we turn this into a YouTube video, my face, or for a lot of this time, Martin's face will be up at the top right for when I put it together. As always, I like to cover a bit of bits and pieces as it pertains to upcoming events, mainly because I keep pushing that we should be super keen on supporting local events in our user groups, etc. Some of the things coming up, it's coming to what I call conference season. September, October, November, that's when things ramp up toward the end of the year. So we've got the Croatian user group coming up. Everyone says it's always an amazing event. Unfortunately, I can't get there. It's just too much of time commitment and money commitment. So it's going to be a fantastic event. And so please, if you're in that vicinity, go see that. Everyone always raves about that event. Some things that I do hope to be at, I've been accepted for. Now I'm going to the Gods of Travel funding inside Oracle Corporation, and hopefully I can get there. The Polish Oracle user group coming up in November. Just before that is the UK OUG user group. Call for papers, I think, closed just last week. So they're going through the votes. Once again, I hope to get accepted for that because that'd be great to go and sort of piggyback that onto the Poland user groups. And we've also got the DOAG big conference coming up. I've been accepted to talk there. Once again, hoping to get there, hoping to get those three conferences done in the one trip. A whole stack of Oracle people and a whole stack of sort of luminaries from the Oracle community, ACEs, ACE directors, etc., will all be descending on any one of those three conferences. So if you're in England, Poland, or Germany, in fact, anywhere in Europe, try get along to those three events and including the Croatia one. Of course, the big one for us as Oracle is Cloud World is just around the corner. Head over to Cloud World now. The official schedule is live, so you can actually see the entire list of things coming. You can see what days they're on, what times they're on. You can see who's speaking, etc. Needless to say, I'm going to dedicate the next 25 seconds to some selfless self-promotion, and that is shameless self-promotion. And that is, I've got a couple of talks there, so 5 great features in the database you're probably not using. And I've got a little theater session. I want to smash this theater apart. I want to basically say, let's get a group of people in the exhibition hall and let's destroy this place. We're going to do as many 23C features as we can in 23 minutes. That'll be a blink and you miss it session. Can't wait for that. That'll be lots of fun. But if you can get to Cloud World, I think you can still register for a discounted price. But if you get Cloud World, please come along. It's in the Venetian this year in Vegas. Come say hello. I'd love to chat to anyone that's been involved with Oracle this year. And I'm just back from the Yatra tour, 6 cities in about 7 days in India. Absolutely fantastic. Just a couple little pictures here. It's not the conference, it's not the speaking, it's the actual community. The Indian people are just so nice. They're so friendly. They love their selfies. Just a great bunch of people. Fantastic community. Fantastic event. It takes its toll on the speakers. We lost a few to food poisoning and the like, but still. An absolutely awesome event. Some of the bonds you make on these conferences, you make for life. So it's absolutely fantastic. All of that, of course, says that same old thing, which is support your local Oracle user groups, please. They did it hard during COVID, and it's so hard for those people who are putting in so much volunteer time when they don't get the rewards of all that effort you put in. I think we had nearly 1,000 people across the cities in India, so remarkably successful event. Wherever you are in the world, if you're going to a user group event, please support those user groups, make them successful, because ultimately we all prosper as customers of the Oracle technology. Now, a special guest tonight and a special topic indeed. And I'm delighted to introduce Martin Bach. And the reason I'm delighted to introduce him, and I'll hand over the floor to him in just a second, is for a few simple reasons. Number one is, like me, he's a former member of the ACE program, an ACE director, much like myself. Now that we're Oracle employees, we become, I think we're officially called ACE alumni, which effectively means we've been booted out because Oracle people can't be part of the ACE program. But just that means that the ACE program is all about people who have independent thought. They're not marketing people for Oracle. They can say whatever they want, and they're experts in the Oracle industry. So Martin, a former ACE director like myself, so that creates a bond. Martin's written a whole stack of books as well. He's an expert Oracle certified master. He's done a whole stack of fantastic content, both in books, both in presentations and conference and blogs, etc. over the years. But perhaps the one thing that I think bonds us closely is if you look through Martin's resume on LinkedIn, you'll see way back in, let me look at the slides, 2006, 2009, he worked at EDBA, at that time, small consultancy in the UK, down in the south of England. And funnily enough, I worked there as well. Both of us had good friends in Lisa and Justin who founded the company. So it's funny how I didn't know Martin in those days, but it's funny how when I finally met Martin, I think at a UKOG many, many years later, we both said, oh yes, we both worked at that company. So many things bring us together. But on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Martin because he's got some awesome stuff to tell you about for the rest of this session. I'll sit on the chat. I'll moderate the chat and the Q&A, and I'll do my best to interject Martin if we need to ask some questions. But other than that, I'm going to hand over to Martin. Welcome to the Office Hours session, Martin.
Oh, thank you so much, Connor. I'm really humbled to be here. As you say, it's talking to the user group, to the community, for me is one of the big things that I've been looking forward to keeping up when I joined Oracle. And I'm super privileged in a way to be part of a team that allows me to do so much outreach. And like you were saying, there are lots of conferences coming up. I have submitted papers to some of them. For some of them, I've been accepted. Now, like you, I'm talking to the people who've got the budget to travel, and I'm hoping to make it to as many as possible. And put this up because there's been some interesting stuff that I've been involved with over the last year and a half almost now. Seems like time's flying. I joined Oracle in December 21. And one of the things that I wanted to do is, take the feedback that I have as a member of the ACE community into Oracle and help improve an already good product to make it even better and more accessible to everyone using it. And when I was asked about a year and a half ago, as I said, if I wanted to become the product manager for Multilingual Engine or MLE and work with JavaScript support within the database, I thought this is a great opportunity to add my experience that I have gathered over the years to that product. And this product has got a long history. Long before I joined Oracle, Multilingual Engine existed. It existed as a prototype. And with Oracle 21c, it finally got productionized and shipped for the first time. And what you're going to see today is not only what has been done in 21c, which was before my time, I can't take any credit of that, but I've been working towards the release of 23c free developer release, which is for someone who's been part of the beta program, this has been in the past. This has been quite remarkable because previously it's always been that Oracle kept all the new things pretty tightly under covers until the big reveal event. And I have never seen Oracle do something like that happened in April, I think it was, when this 23c free developer release was made available for everyone to just download, to play with, to maybe test their application code against, and provide feedback. And that feedback has been invaluable to us, and I've been closely involved in all the activities leading towards that release from an application developer side. And the feedback we got in the forums, as I said, was super good. It helped shape features. We took feedback from customers on board, and developed our software in that way if it was possible. And the same thing happened for JavaScript as well. So that's kind of building the bridge to what I'm going to say. But because it's 23C, I need to put up the safe harbor statement because I'm talking about something that has been released a while back, and what the final product looks like may not be entirely the same thing as you see in the free developer release. This is why I'm saying, things may change, and that's a good thing. Like I said, there's a lot of customer feedback that has been brought and incorporated. But from a product perspective, I need to say that things may be slightly different. Okay, now, what is this multilingual engine for JavaScript? So in a nutshell, it allows you to run JavaScript code inside the database. So previously you could, of course, use Node Oracle DB. It's a driver interface that you can use with your Node or Dino applications, and you could connect to the database and run arbitrary code that was available. But that was a client-side thing. You needed to install the driver. Up until recently, you also had to have a client, which is a requirement gone now with the current version. But you were writing client-side code. And I've always been a great fan, based on my career, actually, of writing server-side code. My first job after university was working for an independent software vendor. And what they did, and that goes back 20 years or so, they had an Oracle Forms interface, so a user interface, which was essentially just used to present data. And all the calculations, and there was lots of calculations, all that calculation was done on the database server, and that worked really well. So I may be biased towards the server-side processing because I've had a really good experience with it. And there was PL/SQL for forever, it feels. And in the meantime, I think in the 10G timeframe, Oracle introduced support for Java stored procedures that you could use as well. And with 23C, or rather, 23C, there is support for JavaScript code within the database. So there are 3 major languages, plus, of course, many others that you can use as external processors. And there is a plenty of opportunity to write code within the database. In 21C, the code was executed dynamically. And I've got a little code example on the gray background, which explains how that works. There is a package in the database. It's called dbmsmle, and that ships with every 20C database. Although, I should probably caveat that, the actual execution of code by Multilingual Engine is limited to Linux x86 64. So you try to run this on Windows, you will get a message that this platform is not supported. But if you're on 21C and you're running Linux, you can make use of this dbmsmle package. And it works by allocating a context, and you define the JavaScript code in form of a snippet, which is a glob or a varchar, depending on the size of what you want to run. And then you, in the package body, you create the context, you evaluate your JavaScript code against the context, and then you drop the context. And that's essentially what you do. And one of the first adopters, and we're super grateful for their support, is the Apex team. So there's been a very close collaboration between the JavaScript team, Multilingual Engine team, and the Apex team. And quite some time ago, you could run Apex applications. And when you go into the page editor, you have the opportunity to write PL/SQL code for validations, for example. But there's a drop down if you're on the right platform where you can select JavaScript, and you can just put JavaScript code into a text box, and all the ceremonial code before and after is taken care of. You just submit it and you run it, or you put it into the code and it validates it. So there is this use case. But with 23C, a lot of new things have been added. Because as you can see in the code example, we're mixing JavaScript and PL/SQL. And maybe that's not the best thing in the world. Wouldn't it be nicer if we had the opportunity to store JavaScript code in its native format in the database, just like a procedure or a package? And that's what happened in 23C. And we now have the opportunity to run SQL and PL/SQL or JavaScript in anywhere where PL/SQL and SQL are run using module calls, or we can use inline call specifications. And I've got a little example here as well. So I'm creating a rather meaningless module called hello module. And you can see that there's a new DDL command which has been introduced. So it's create MLE module. You give it a name, and then currently language JavaScript is what you set as next. So to identify the language, and anything following the as keyword is JavaScript. And just as with a PL/SQL package, you use the slash in SQL+, for example, or in SQL to denote the end of that package or that module, sorry. And then once that's been created, it is persisted in the database. It will be backed up. It will be replicated using DataGuard, all the good stuff. And then you create what we call a call specification on top of it, which is the next command you see down there in the text box. It is create function, and it's the function name. It takes parameters just like a PL/SQL function would do. It has a return type. And from then on, it becomes slightly different because you then say as MLE module, hello module, which is the module I just created. And then you say which function within that module you're supposed to run. And in my case, it's hello, and it takes a string as a parameter. And that is a JavaScript string. And if there were multiple functions in that hello module and they were all exported, like ECMAScript functions must be exported if they want to be used, if you want them to use them outside the module, then you could have another function pointing to the same module and a different function within that module. And once that's been done, you can call the JavaScript code in SQL+ or anywhere. You can call SQL, select hello world, and I think when that prints hello world on the screen if you've got server output on. The other thing that has been added is support for what we call inline call specifications. And going back to the previous slide, you see that if I've got just one function that I would like to use, you need to create a module, and then you create a call specification, and then you call the actual function. You can simplify this. If you just need something simple, like, there is a JavaScript function that does in one line what you would otherwise have to write in many lines, and you lazy like me, I just use this. For example, I converted an epoch date to an Oracle date using the date object in JavaScript. It's just a one-liner. It's super easy. And you could do something using the inline call specification. So it starts again with create function. It has a name. It takes parameters. Just you need to be aware that JavaScript is case sensitive. So if you would like to use name and lowercase in your function, in your JavaScript function, then you need to use the double quotes in the PL/SQL part. Otherwise, Oracle would automatically make that an uppercase parameter, and JavaScript would complain about a parameter it doesn't know, even though it's just the spelling. And then you can execute arbitrary JavaScript code in that body of the function. And you can use the same select statement, just calling a different function, to print hello world, print hello world on the screen. So this is what's been added. Inline JavaScript, call specifications, modules, environments. We talk about those in a bit. There is debugging as well, and background compilation. We support JSON, which is a big new feature in 21C that few people have used, sadly, but it's the JSON capabilities are just amazing. And we have support for the simple Oracle document access model. So you can use a document API as well if you don't like the relational APIs and you would like to use something that is a document API to interact with so the databases, collections, and documents within those collections.
Martin, quick question from the chat. Someone said the hello world example obviously just returned a string. What other kind of data types can we return?
We can return any data type that Oracle database supports.
Cool.
Yep. So then when I get to that point in the presentations, people typically ask me, so why JavaScript? And what made you implement JavaScript as a server-side language? So the first thing is, if you look at social media, if you look at posts and conferences, what people are up to these days is you notice that applications are becoming increasingly polyglot. Especially if you look at those developers who write microservices, they say my microservice is written in the language that I'm comfortable with, and as long as the premise is that the development team takes care of that code and maintains it, then that's fine. So from a attractiveness point of view, the more popular a language becomes, the larger is its ecosystem. And if you look at the various languages that are currently very popular, like JavaScript, there is a huge ecosystem of open source libraries that you could potentially use to simplify your development projects. And JavaScript is without doubt one of the most popular languages out there. And this is one of the reasons why internally we speak about making a bigger tent. We would like to make the database more attractive to developers. And as there is a huge number of JavaScript developers, it only seems natural that you add JavaScript as a language alongside PL/SQL and Java in the database. And I should hasten to add that these languages don't compete against each other. It's definitely not what I see for JavaScript or any of the other languages. It's just a different flavor. Some people and a lot of our customers, they are very happy with PL/SQL. They have a huge investment in PL/SQL. And so in conferences, I get asked, are we going to throw PL/SQL away and just rewrite everything in JavaScript? By no means. Keep your investment in the existing PL/SQL estate that you have. But if you would like to grow your team, for example, it may be the case that you find a JavaScript developer or somebody who's been working in the front-end development who is taking a keen interest in performance and database design, and you can now more easily integrate these great guys into your team.
Put you on the spot here, Martin. If I had to get, if you had to guess which language would come next, which would it be after JavaScript?
That is actually not defined yet, but we had a poll at an Apex office hours a couple of months ago, and we asked the participants, what would you like to see? What would be your preferred next language that you would like to see us implement? And the overwhelming number of responses came back as Python. So, and anyone on this office hours, if you would like to share what you would like to see next, that would help me make the case towards management and say, hey, look, we've been talking to the guys and the community said, we would like to see language XYZ. And, there were the majority of people for that language. Why don't we try implementing XYZ? So anyone, this is your opportunity to influence the future. So feel free to share what you think is what you would like to see and maybe why. And I'll definitely go and harass Connor to get a transcript of the chat and take that to the team for discussion. But having said that, let me jump over to a quick demo, because that's been a lot of text. So a lot of text is one thing, but I believe in demos. Can you see that video that's about to play, Connor? Is that showing?
Sorry, I can see it. I just didn't have my mute on. I have a giant monitor, so if anyone else has a small monitor and can't see it, sing out. But I'm fine with it.
Okay, so let me quickly walk you through what you would normally do in starting development with server-side JavaScript. So the first thing is you create a user, obviously. And in here, I'm granting the new DB developer role to that user, and I'm granting it a few other privileges I'll talk about later. I'm also creating a directory. That'll become useful just in a bit. And now I hop over, connect as that newly created user, enter my password. And the next thing I'll do is I'm going to always enable my schema. And that is because I would like to show you database actions, which is one of the front ends you can use to interact with JavaScript. So that's now done. And because I'm inherently lazy, and I remember from universities, we were once tasked to validate input. So we created a data model, and as part of that data model, we were asked to create triggers. And these triggers had to, validate things like addresses and email addresses, and other things. And that was something we had to write. At that time, I didn't know anything about the open source projects that could help you with that. And one of the ones that can help you with that is the validator in JS, which is available on NPM, but it's an open source module. So the one thing about open source modules and incorporating them in your code is that you need to make sure that the license under which the open source code is made available is compatible with what you're about to do. And because I'm not a lawyer, I put this in, talk to the compliance, IT security, and any other teams in your company dealing with open source software and adding them into your projects. Now let's assume in my case, that's all fine. I downloaded the module code into a directory, the directory which I just created previously. So the user, Emily, has access to that directory. And now I can create this Emily module based on the JavaScript code that I just downloaded. So that has happened. I can now check. There is a new dictionary view. It's called user MLE modules, and it shows me that a module named validator has been made available. Now, as you always do, you jump to the docs. Validator is available under the MAT license, just to show you where that is found. And I would like to validate email addresses. So there is a function called isEmail, and I give it a string, and it will tell me it is an email address or it isn't. So that's exactly the assignment I had, a long time ago. I need to create a call specification, which is what I do next. So this is a function that takes a string and it returns a Boolean. And if it's an email, it'll return true. If it's not an email, as you can see, in this case, it returns false. And now I put in my email address and it will return true. Hooray. So without a single line of code, I can validate a lot of things. IsEmail is just one function. And just to show you how that looks like in database actions, I created an OAuth instance that is tagged against that PDB. And there is a new tile here called MLE.js. And just to show you, I'm on 23.2. So this is a few weeks old. There's a newer release of OAuth already. But you can see there is a tree structure where you see the validator module has been created and the core specification, which allows me to call the functionality within this module, is shown as well. And if I jump to the SQL pane, I can just run the same query, and obviously I get the same result. So my email address is indeed a valid email address. And yeah, that's the first demo done. So this is where I see a lot of interesting opportunities for developers, because if you're faced with a challenge, you need to do something or the other, chances are that somebody has already solved that problem. And provided, like I said, say it again, provided that open source module that you can freely get from the internet is compatible with your project from all the various angles, I don't want to repeat again, then it might actually be possible to save a lot of time by incorporating this third-party module in your project. Okay, and this is bringing me back to the question of developer experience. It's really important to have good developer experience, and this is actually one of the key things that are going to happen with 23C. The idea is to make the developer experience better for anyone working with a database. Okay, now I always find discussions interesting about the pros and cons of storing code in the database. As I said previously, I'm a slightly biased person. I do actually like to have a database API, especially when it comes to working with large amounts of data. And I've been a consultant for many, many years. And typically performance problems that I have been dealing with arise with chatty applications, something that transfers data back and forth with the database, which is going to increase latency. And that is not a problem if you do it 100 times, but if you've got a latency of a millisecond and you do that 10 million times, that sums up and it becomes a real issue. And if you can find a way for some of your business logic, at least, to do that processing within the database, maybe you can overcome some of those problems. And the general things that have been said about PL/SQL, they obviously apply here as well. If you write bad JavaScript code, you can't get around performance issues, right? But if you write reasonably good JavaScript code and you deal with large amounts of data that would otherwise require lots of round trips, then it's probably going to help you if you put some of the processing logic into the database.
Just a question, Martin, on that. I know back in the day, back in the 8i and 9i days, we used to cop a lot of flack when starting up a Java routine from the database was slow because there was that time to sort of launch a JVM. So once the JVM was going, then running Java in the database was fine. A question came in from Aaron saying, are there similar issues here? Are we creating engines on the fly? Are we jumping between engines, etc.?
That's a really good question. Initially there is a certain overhead with the first invocation of JavaScript core because it needs to, let's backtrack once. So if you don't use any JavaScript functionality with your code, we don't want the ability to run JavaScript code to interfere with performance. So we don't do anything. Only if you start using JavaScript code, then we initialize certain things. And so there is a small ramp up time. We reduced this quite a bit over the course of the last 12, 14 months. And now, once the first execution is done, it's really going to be fast. But there is a small delay the first time you run a piece of JavaScript code. But there are things, as I said before, there's just-in-time compilation as well. So there are performance enhancements that go over the lifetime of your session and your application. That sounds very convoluted, does it? I hope it answers the questions.
No, that's cool.
No, okay. So just a reminder again, we're not competing against PL/SQL or Java. We don't want to replace either of them. Keep your investment. And if you want, leverage the popularity of JavaScript to add additional capabilities. And there is one thing I didn't say before. Imagine you've got a package and your package has 42 different subroutines, and now you figure out, I would like to maybe change one to be written instead of PL/SQL. I would like to make a JavaScript function available. So you don't have to replace the entire package, the PL/SQL package. You just do one function within that package. You can just point to the JavaScript module. So you can mix and match. That's also possible. Okay, so kind of summarizing the use cases. The first thing is inline core specifications, which is the JavaScript code and the PL/SQL header, so to say, in one piece, where you create the JavaScript function in line with the PL/SQL code unit. This is super useful if you know, if you're a JavaScript developer, you know how to do some sort of transformation, how to use, convert an epoch to a date, things like that. Those are the typical use cases. You get the standard MLE modules like the database driver, the SQL driver, and the cache API, you get all of those. But if you're using your own modules, then you can't make use of those within the code that you attach to that PL/SQL function. So the example is writing a small distinct piece of code, just a JavaScript function. If you don't want to go through the whole process of creating module, maybe environment, and later on invoke that via a core specification. Then you've got the kind of in the middle, you've got the key feature of 23C, which is modules and environments. So they're new Schema objects. They are used for complex applications, using third-party modules, embedding third-party modules in your own modules, and so on and so forth. And you can invoke all of this function anywhere where you can invoke SQL and PL/SQL. So this would be, more complex business logic. If you follow the SmartDB paradigm, use community code. That's where we see this being used. And then finally, we've got dynamic execution, which has been around since 21. You use dbms MLE, this package. There's this eval function to execute code snippets. And we think this is best used for ad hoc code if you just want to try something. It's actually what you see in database actions as well, and also in Apex. If you just want to write some JavaScript, test what you're about to put into a module, use dbms MLE for that. And the GUIs use that under the covers. REPL servers enable diagnostics. So there is, if you want to debug stuff, then dbms MLE has got all the functions that you need. But JavaScript code is not stored independently in the dictionary, which I think is a slight disadvantage for writing applications. So I wouldn't want to encourage that approach. Who uses it? Application Express and database actions. There is plenty of functionality already built in. So I've been previously talking about community modules, but there is obviously, we need to ship functionality that you're using when you're creating your own code, like the equivalent of a PL/SQL stored procedure package function. So there is, of course, a JavaScript SQL driver. And one of the questions I typically get is, can we call PL/SQL from JavaScript? Of course you can. Anything you can do, if you're familiar with Node Oracle DB, anything you can do in Node Oracle DB, almost anything you can do in Node Oracle DB, you can do with server-side, with the server-side SQL driver as well. The main difference is that the server-side driver is implemented synchronously, which has to do with the way the database operates, whereas the client-side operates asynchronously. So you see a lot of async await in client-side code, which you don't need in the server-side code. But even if you leave it in, it continues to work. It just gets silently ignored, which is very important. It means that client code that you have should work with only the minimal number of changes. And the other thing that's important is instrumentation. One of the things I've always fought for is instrumenting code using module and action. And of course, you can do the same thing in server-side JavaScript, but you can also use secret trace to trace execution of your JavaScript code in the SQL part, of course. And there is also Ash integration and so active session history, as well as what's it called? Stats pack. That's just eluded me. So we give you the ability to see the top level call, which would be the core specification, but we can also give you all the various statistics for individual cursors within the piece of PL/SQL code, the JavaScript code, which is exactly the same as you would expect from PL/SQL. There is a fetch API that's built in. It allows you to use the same interface as you would on a browser or in Node. If you use the fetch API, Node comes with its own HTTP package, but if you were to use the standard API, you could use fetch to fetch resources from a web service, for example. So you could do that, and most web services nowadays return JSON, and JSON is short for JavaScript object notation, and this is really one of the sweet spots. So if you work with JSON and you fetch it from a remote source, and it's so easy to interact with these JSON documents that are internally represented as JavaScript objects, that I can do it. So that's super awesome and super easy. So if you've got a background working with these things, this might be for you. And there is also, and that's something that I didn't think about when I joined this project, is the need to have PL/SQL type wrappers to JavaScript types. You run things in JavaScript, it knows about JavaScript, but it doesn't know about the database types. Say, for example, the numeric data type in JavaScript, it's based on a very elaborate floating point number, and you can get some funny results sometimes working with that. And if you need the absolute precision, you can use with Oracle data types inside your code and interact with that and pass Oracle data types back to the engine, so that you have lossless conversions between these variables. And they're all documented. So we didn't document them in the MLE JavaScript Developers Guide. These modules that I just talked about are all available on GitHub. So the MLE SQL driver, the SQL bindings I'm not going to talk about, but the PS SQL types as well, and also the fetch API. So you can navigate to that site on GitHub, and it has a beautiful API that you can explore at your heart's delight.
Question from the audience, Martin.
Yeah.
Someone has said, and I'll try to paraphrase this. Usually when we try to use Node.js packages, we face, I'm assuming they say we face challenges of modules calling each other. Is there any way to handle this in MLE?
There is, and I'm going to get to that in a bit. But essentially, just to answer that question right now. So what you do in Node and Deno is you install the package or you write your own code, and then you reference functionality from your code or your package using the import statement. And the import statement then points to a location on the file system. So you say, as my project has got a file A, and in file A, I've got a function that I would like to use in file B. So I need to import function from file A. This does not work because everything is stored in the database. There is no file system that you could use. And for that purpose, the MLE team comes up with the environment. And an environment is essentially a mapper between a module, an MLE module, and an import name that you can, let's say you've got module A and you would like to use module A in module B. You create an environment, you say within module B, I would like to call the module A foo or whatever, and that's your import name. And I'm going to show you in a bit, but that's how it works. Speaking of which, how do you work with JavaScript in the database? So thinking back about the demo, you need some MLE specific privileges to create schema objects and run JavaScript. So by default, you can't. Then you create your application. Once you've got the privileges to do so, using modules, inline core specifications, what have you. Then you create core specifications for your modules to expose your functionality to SQL and PS SQL. And then you run your code. And the privileges which you require, there is one that's of paramount importance, which is grant execute on JavaScript to user. And I suggest you grant this to the user, not to a role. If you want to run dynamic MLE, you also need a grant called grant execute dynamic MLE to user. And if you would like to use Soda for your applications, you need the Soda app role, which is in line with everything else that we do around Soda. So that allows you to run things, but it doesn't allow you to create things yet. So if you want to create MLE modules and environments in your own schema, you need a privilege called create MLE. And there is no, I mean, this is just flat out applicable to everything. No special JavaScript privilege needed for MLE core specifications. But if you want to create core specifications, they are functions and PS SQL. So you need to create, you need to have that grant as well. And if you're thinking ahead on, maybe CI pipelines where you've got kind of a super user that needs to create, modify, drop MLE schema objects, not in your own schema exclusively, but in others as well, there is the create, alter, and drop any MLE system privilege. But they exist in the database, but they're very powerful. And for that reason, I would say, if you can avoid using them, you probably should. And they're granted to sys and DBA accounts by default, which are super privileged accounts, and they are normally looked after really well with strong passwords, auditing, and what have you. But anyway, it's a super powerful system privilege. I would be very careful about granting it. I mean, it's audited, which is good, but I think if you don't really have a need for that, and just being lazy is not a requirement or a need, then you should probably grant the privilege create MLE to that user that needs to create these things. I spoke about a few other privileges. There's a new role in database 23c called the developer role, which bundles all of these auxiliary things. So you can create tables, indexes, views, and many other things, functions. So I end up granting the DB developer role to the user in my development environment. Production is a different story. You maybe not have that DB developer role granted to users. You would probably have more directed grants given. But for developers, this is really great. Okay, so now let's talk about inline core specifications with a little more elaborate example. So anything between those Q quotes in those funky colors here is JavaScript code. And this function takes an input string, it's separated, its key value is separated by a semicolon, and it splits it into tuples and returns a JavaScript object, which is then known to the database as JSON. So that is an example for some more elaborate functionality. But there is often the need to convert that kind of data into JavaScript objects or JSON. And if I run JSON serialize with this function, give it a string, you can see the result is being printed. And you can use this function anywhere you would use SQL or PL/SQL. The other way is to use modules and environments. So here I've got the same function, but this time it's in an MLE module. I'm using JSDoc because I'm a good citizen, or at least I hope to be one. Document the function and also the parameters that are being used. And this is useful if you use DB actions, by the way. Okay, so this is the module, which is being stored as a schema object. But now there is the question that we had just previously. How do I make use of a function in a module in another module? So the module you can see on this side of the screen is called helper functions, and helper functions contains the function string to JSON. And now I've got another module called business logic. And in business logic, I've got a function that processes orders, and these orders are in fact strings. So before I can make use of my insert statement below, I need to convert that string into a JSON. And I'm using the string to JSON function from the helpers module in there. And the helpers within single quotes there, this is the import name, and I'll show you the environment in a minute. But this slide shows that you can use functionality exported from other modules in your module. And this could be either your own modules or community modules. Like the validator example, I could validate a string there as well. And I can run ordinary SQL statements, and I can pass in bind variables and everything you would expect from the SQL driver. And I wrap this into, I create this module, and here you see the syntax for the MLE module. I call it business logic environment. Sorry, did I say module? I mean environment, of course. And I'm mapping this helpers string to my module helper functions. And now I tie everything together. I create the order packages as my core specification. It contains the process order function, which maps to the business logic module. But I'm using the environment to help the business logic module resolve the helpers module, pointing to helper to that module. And this way I can run my code. And if I do so, I can actually execute this and insert data into a table. And there are a couple of dictionary views that you should be aware of. I mean, that's actually 4. User MLE modules, user MLE procedures, they allow you to show which modules you have, what core specifications you have. For environments, you can view which import names point to which module. And finally, there is dynamic code execution. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's kind of intended for frameworks and these read, execute, process, and what is L again? Well, let's call them wrapper servers. That's where they are probably being best used, or for rapid prototyping. Here is an example how you could do this, and it becomes a little. I like to think of it as a little bit messy because you've got a lot of PL/SQL, you've got a bit of JavaScript code there, but essentially in here you run a SQL query and you find out that you're connected as a given user. I mean, it fetches your username that you use to connect against the database. Okay, troubleshooting. So the first thing I did is when I learned more about this functionality, I inquired about how can we actually find out if something goes wrong. So think about the nested errors. So you've got a module and you've got multiple functions and they're deeply nested. So you see on the left-hand side, F1 calls F2, F2 calls F3, F3 calls F4, and within F4, there is an error. Now you run this and it tells you there is an error at F4. And this is just unexpected errors, maybe not a good error message, it's just something I came up with. And at least it tells me line and position within the module where this happened, but it doesn't tell me how did I get there. And there is a really useful functionality in PL/SQL called DBMS utility format error backtrace. And we can do something similar. So in here, I'm running the same code again. So you can see that I've got nested errors package.pf1. This calls F1 and then calls F2, 3, 4, and so on. And I've got those error frames that I can fetch and present on the screen. So now you can see that exactly how you ended up at F4, and it starts bottom to top. This is the way the stack's been populated. The other thing you can do is dynamically instrument JavaScript code using debug points. And that is quite interesting because it allows you to attach a debug specification to an execution context, like a running program. And you don't need to do any code changes, and you don't need to redeploy something. And this is, I mean, it would take me a long time to explain. So I'll try and show you how this works in a demo. So here I've got a function. Maybe I should explain what that does first. So this function fetches data from a URL that I instructed to. So think of it as me fetching data from ports. And it does so. And if there's a network error or something else, I capture this and print it to the screen and throw the error. And then I extract the JSON data from the response and return it to the caller. But what if something goes wrong? Maybe I would like to know what the URL is, or if the URL is okay and I don't get a network error, but I get data that I don't expect, maybe I would like to know what the return data is. So let's see how I could do that. So there's this fetch demo module. It has an environment. Fetch demo is the name that kind of refers to the fetch demo module. You can see from the output that my auto rest enabled table returns data. So I'm fetching from the employees table. Now what I need to do is I need to run this. And now you can see me type in real time. But I'll use this time to explain what's going to happen. So this is when I say database actions allows you to run arbitrary JavaScript code, and it uses DBMS MLE under the covers. This is exactly what happens. So you type in code, which is JavaScript code, and you've got syntax highlighting. And as you can see, you also have a wonderful JS doc being presented to you. So it has code completion as well, and so on and so forth. So this makes your life a lot easier, and this helps a lot if you develop your code. So what I do is I import this functionality from the module. I have a variable where I fetch data to, and that's it. And now there's the cool bit. I'll pause the video at this point. So on the right-hand side, you see the code I would like to debug. On the left-hand side, you see the debug specification. So this is JavaScript, JSON. And in there, you say you've got an array of debug points, and it's essentially defining watch points or snapshots. You just need to say where something is supposed to happen and what you would like to happen. And here, like I said, I would like to know the value of the URL and the value of the data that has been fetched by that procedure. So I run this now and debug this. And down here, you see the result of my run. So I can see the URL where this is coming from. And you also can see what data has been fetched. And I'm going to click on this in a second, and you can see exactly in the code where this information has been fetched and also the value. And I think this is pretty cool. and you're not limited to this interface. You can kind of think of a way to have this in PSQL as well. There are functions in DBMS MLE to enable debugging, and you can do this on demand. So you could write a wrapper function which has a Boolean like debug this, and if it's false, you don't enable the debug specification. You don't fetch this information, so you don't have any intrusion effects. But if you say, hey, I need to run this again because some error has occurred, I just rerun the wrapper function, but this time I pass the debug flag and I say it's true. And now I can, without changing my code, I just gather the information that I would like to. And you're completely free to have more or less, fine-grained debugging enabled. So it reminds me a little bit of what you can do with dtrace. So I think it's pretty cool.
Question, Martin, has come in. I'm gonna enjoy hearing you answer this one.
Okay.
The question is, where do I draw the line for leaving JavaScript in the client as opposed to running it on the server?
How long is a piece of string? This is really tricky. I guess it depends on how much code do you already have in your client. If one of the examples I can think of is you've got an application, you've written that in Node Oracle DB, and now you would like to explore options on how I could put some of that, or maybe all, into the database. So what I would do is I would just look at the code execution times and see where is something slow, which parts of the app are slow. And once I've identified those, I would consider, if possible, moving those things that have slow performance into the database. I think this is what I would do. Anything you would like to improve, and I guess that's everyone's goal, is you measure it, and then those things like Kerry Millsap would say, those things that are important to you, you look at improving by maybe putting it into the database. I think that was a really diplomatic answer. Although there is no best answer, is there?
True. I mean, I know this sounds like a weird analogy, but it reminds me of the days of Oracle Forms, because you could write PL SQL in Forms as well as in the database. And generally, it was always a case of basically look for proximity to data. If you're close to if you're doing a lot of work with the data, then your code is good to be close to the data. If you're just occasionally touching the data, then it's not so important. And Aaron's thrown in a follow-up question. Where do I draw the line? Okay. Where do I draw the line between PL SQL and JavaScript?
Oh, well, that's pretty easy to answer. So first of all, if you've got a lot of code written in PL SQL and you've got a team full of enthusiastic PL SQL developers, that's fine. And like I said, I wouldn't want you to rewrite PL SQL in JavaScript just for the sake of rewriting it. I believe the industry has been full of trends where we just did something and converted A to B just because everyone did. And in the end, it took a long time and maybe didn't provide as much value as you would have hoped. So if you've got a good JavaScript team, a good PL SQL team, and you're happy with the application and you can accommodate your requirements easily, then I think writing it in PL SQL is perfectly fine. But if you've got maybe a different kind of developer, maybe you've got people from the front end and you would like to embrace server-side development together with them, that's a good point. Or if you've got people who are very good at JavaScript, it's really easier to let them write JavaScript in the database. So it's a matter of preference, I guess, and also which language helps you achieve your goals and how easy is it to start my projects. That's probably what I would say. Okay. Let's quickly wrap up because I think we're getting towards the end. Just wanted to say, if you find this interesting and you would like to get your feet wet with the technology, there is a live lab which you can use, and it's green button, which means it runs in a sandbox. You wait for 10 minutes, You've got instructions on the left-hand side. You've got an environment. You just need to copy paste and you learn, hopefully, how this whole thing works. And if you like to stay up to date, go have a look at the developers blog. I've been pretty busy lately publishing posts on various aspects. So for example, I've written something about linting ME modules in continuous integration pipelines, which is also something for which the JavaScript ecosystem has lots of tools available. I mean, it's got more tools than you can shake a stick at. And it is quite hard to find out which tool should I use for a particular job. So there is also content. And of course, we've got the database JavaScript developers guide that has been released. And I would be more than happy to hear from you guys if you think the flow is right, the examples are good, whether it's understandable, and so on and so forth. And with that said, I think I'm finishing on the hour. This is pretty good. I'm happy with that. So thank you everyone for attending and staying on, listening to me, being enthusiastic about the stuff I've been doing for a good while now. And I have to say, I am truly happy with the outcome, what it is like. And I think it's a good thing for our customers to have more choice to develop code against the database. And like a former boss of mine said, choices are good, the more the merrier.
Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. My brain's about to explode, so I'll have to go back and I will enjoy editing this recording because I'll basically go through and study it again. But just once again, a shout out to Martin made reference to Live Labs. There's literally several hundred tutorials on Live Labs about our whole technology stack. It's developer.oracle.com/livelabs. Almost everything there is free in the sense that you don't even have to have your own cloud tenancy. You don't have to sign up and give a credit card. What happens is you basically click on a lab and we'll spool up one of our existing cloud machines for you and we'll give you the credentials to it. You go on, run your stuff, learn some great stuff, and then we reclaim it back. So if you've not seen developer oracle.com/livelabs before, I know that also a whole stack of new labs have been pushed out just in time for Cloud World. So that'll be awesome. Now, in terms of Cloud World, unfortunately, I don't think I'll have an office hours next month because I think it's slap bang in the middle of Cloud World. Or we might try to a live stream from Cloud World where we just basically give some highlights and I'll just wander around the exhibition hall with a camera or a phone, and we might try to a very brief but fun office hours live, and just basically maybe just to show you around how the exhibition hall works and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll do that. Otherwise, we might have to scrap office hours. But if you're interested in something like that, where it's not really technical, it's more just showing you around Cloud World, ideally, obviously, you should be there as opposed to watching it on a video. But if you can't make it, if you're interested in something like that, hit me up on Twitter in a DM or something. But once again, big thanks to Martin. I hope you've enjoyed this content. Obviously, 23C is out there now in the developer release, so please go grab it, download it, have some fun with it. Let us know what you think of it. Do your best to try break it. Basically, the more we can exercise that product before it becomes generally available sometime in the next, 12 months, the better for all of us. So once again, thanks to Martin. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you all next month, hopefully, office hours. Bye for now, everybody.
Take care.